All right then. I gave this at the 15. So I gave this 15 years ago. One of the early DevOps days. And then when we were doing the 15th anniversary, Chris had asked me if I wanted to present, and I thought, why don't I do an updated version of this presentation 15 years later? So there we go. Deming to DevOps. How many people have heard of Dr. Deming? All right, we got a couple. Okay. I've got a couple of books. I don't know how I'm going to figure out how to give them because I don't have enough for everybody. For anybody who doesn't want one, you can opt out and then makes my decision easier. But maybe any clever question at the end or something like that we could do, if you think you might enjoy the book. So it's just kind of funny, right? Like I like having 50 minutes because that's like a speaker's dream, right? Because I can do stupid stories like this. So I've been playing around, like about 2 years ago, I'm playing around with ChatGPT, DALL-E, whatever, lately Mid-Journey. And I'm like, I want to make a cool image of myself. So go out and figure out everything you know about me. I ragged a little bit of it, so I fed some stuff in. And it came back with this really good-looking young guy. I said, okay, that's not right. So I said, can you make it a little older? Maybe a little older, but it's still a really good-looking guy. So I said, can you make him a little fatter? And it makes it a little fatter, but it's still a good-looking guy. So I said, can you make it a little more not that handsome? And this is what I got. This is what I wound up with. So fun, create your own image story if you're interested. I've done a lot of stuff. Some of you know me. And probably my most interesting thing right now is, and what we'll see this is, I've been thinking a lot about sort of artificial intelligence and what CEOs are doing with CIOs, and CIOs are struggling to understand what the heck is going on. And I've really been sort of playing. So I created a newsletter called Dear CIO. It's based on a paper we wrote as part of Gene Kim's IT Revolution. So I'll get into that a little bit, but I've done a lot of stuff. If you don't know, I was sort of the first grown-up at Chef. I sold a company to Dell. I sold a company to Docker. I was on an executive team. So I've done a lot of stuff. But I have written a lot of books too. I think at this point 12 books. Probably the most notable was I co-authored the DevOps Handbook. But my sort of white whale, if you will, is the book that I'm going to focus a little about Deming. It was my sort of 10-year journey to figure out why did this guy get in my head and how do I get rid of him. But really, it's a fascinating, and I think, the Deming to DevOps was, hey, by the way, you probably don't get DevOps without Dr. Deming. So that's sort of the first part of that. So I have a new book coming out, sort of first rev, and by the way, first rev means like it could be an awfully long time before you get it on Amazon.com, but it should be done the end of this month. I'm going to have Galley. If you happen to be in the U.S., there's going to be a great conference called All Things Open AI, and I'll have Galley copies there, so that'll be fun. It's literally about the history of AI, a storytelling story, whatever. But this presentation is about thinking differently. So therefore, you must think differently. And so let's start with the whole Ward Cunningham technical debt scenario, right? Like, at the end of the day, you could boil down the concept of technical debt to not just software, but like I'm an operations person. I've been in operations since my first job in infrastructure operations were on IBM mainframes in high school. And I then worked for Exxon. I literally wrote an IBM assembler program for 10 years. I've been in infrastructure really my whole life. And so if you ask me at the end of the day, what am I guess I'm an ops person. And I think when we talk about technical debt, right, like it is shortcuts. And so since I'm old, I've seen this shortcut paradigm for quite a long time. In fact, I say that ops people are like cicadas. You know the cicadas? They go to sleep 10, 15, 17 years, and then all of a sudden they wake up and like, what? I'm going to cuss a couple times. I mean, it's Ghent, what the fuck, right? They go, what the fuck did you guys all do? And then we start mopping and cleaning stuff up and and like, this happened in the 80s, something called automated operations. Nobody in this room is old enough to know that. 90s, you might have started jumped on the band with systems automation, things like sort of Tivoli, a lot of big industrial stuff. And then in the 2000s, it got really interesting. Adam Jacob asked me if I wanted to be the grown-up at Chef, and I came on board. I was like the 9th person in there. And that was pretty fun. That was a beautiful decade. Infrastructure is good. I got to hang out with Mark Burgess, you know, a physics guy teaching me, answering all my dumb questions about physics. Obviously Luke Canese, and then, you know, Adam, glorious Adam, and shout out to System Initiative. And then I got involved with these other cats, the ones that we all had to ride this stupid whale. And I sometimes don't like to say this, but sometimes I have to. The criminals once known as Docker, and composable infrastructure. And now we're in this sort of like agentic phase, right? Right? I don't know, man. Like you're like, we'll figure it out. That's what we do. But here's the thing: we never learn from the past. I mean, there's always this promise, and then the gap of what we fulfill, and there's this sort of left behind piece in every one of these decades. And I attribute that a lot to like just not system thinking. Right? And if there's a message that you're going to get out of what Deming was, he was talking about system thinking in the 1940s. Right? And he pounded it until the day he died in 1993. You know, and you know, everybody thinks this is attributed to Einstein. It actually is early 20th century feminist, Rita Mae Byron, right? This insanity is doing the same thing over and over. So, how many people heard of the Abraham Wald story? The bullets, the missing bullets, sorry. It's a cliche DevOps one. I only bring it out periodically because it's like, it's one of my toolbox ones. But the reason it's important here is it's a systems thinking story. So here's the story. During World War II, Abraham Wald and a team of mathematicians, literally down the hall from the Manhattan Project folk, are literally trying to figure out how to use statistics and math to repair planes when they come back, and sort of weight distributions, all statistical stuff. And Abraham Wald at some point goes, wait a minute, we got it all wrong. We're worrying about where the bullet holes are. They're the planes that are coming back. We need to start thinking about where the bullet holes aren't, because they're the ones that aren't coming back. Right? And so there's such a metaphor in the missing bullet hole and not using systems thinking. Like, you know, what I'm going to sort of try to drive home is, are you constantly asking where the bullet holes aren't? And I would argue that everything that Dr. Deming has proposed to you, or what I try to tell you is sort of a storytelling version of his life, is he was always trying to point out where the bullet holes weren't. And so, no, I hate OKRs, sorry. Not going to debate it with you, don't have time. I think OKRs are deterministic nonsense, just like MBOs, just like KPIs. But I had some fun. I had ChatGPT draw me up what an OKR would have looked like if Abraham Wald was basically, and they were trying to figure it out, right? It would say stuff like, I broke my reading glasses, but maximize the efficiency of aircraft repairs by focusing on the most visibly damaged points, right? And then like repair 100% of the planes, increase visible damage reduction by 20%. Allocate resources, reduce time on undamaged areas. I'm telling you, look at your OKRs when you get back home and tell me that they're not saying the same thing. They're not asking you to look where the bullet holes aren't, right? I mean, they are glorious, right? The original book had the right intention. I've 0 times seen it actually implemented properly. And so the other thing I did is I started playing with this AI nonsense about 3 years ago. I was finishing my last book. I thought, oh my God, this is great. All that research I did now is going to get answered for me. And I found out it hallucinated, and it was, but I followed it and I played along. And then I played along enough to see that there was things like RAGs, and I could actually use it effectively for research. And I do now. I use it incredibly for research. It's ridiculous the amount of time it's reduced. But at the same time, because I'm an ops person, I started thinking about what happened with cloud and shadow IT, and I got scared to death, and I wrote an article for my good friend Alan Schimmel at IT Revolution, at DevOps.com, and I wrote an article about the rise of shadow AI. And again, it's that, are we looking where the bullet holes aren't? Are we basically doing shadow IT? Have we reiterated around? Have we learned anything from the past? And another thing we saw, and this is as I started grouping, so I hang out with sort of Gene Kim and his gang, and they're a bunch of like executives that report to CIOs. And we got together and we wrote a paper where we sort of talked about what's going on right now with this AI thing. It was about a year ago. And so we go to Portland, about 50 of us work on research papers, and I get to hang out with these incredible people, Jason Cox at Disney, and I can go on and on. And we picked topics to research. And this one was Dear CIO. And the Dear CIO was that what we were seeing is CEOs are hiring chief AI officers and purposely putting them in other locations from CIOs. And CIOs are being told to stay away from those people. And the chief AI officers are telling them to stay away from the CIOs. In fact, I was in an incredibly large workforce automation company. The chief AI officer, I asked and they built an incredible infrastructure in Gen AI. I mean, really well thought, a lot of CMU, Carnegie Mellon, and Stanford students. And I asked the chief AI officer, had they gone through any of this with the CISO? And like, I wish I could have took film for like a TikTok, and I don't do TikTok, but to see the face, her face, when she realized she couldn't answer yes, and it was a terrible thing that she couldn't answer yes. So we wrote a Phoenix, it's just a paper, it's not really going to turn into a book, but it's like a Phoenix project style, where the CIO is like, hey, I think this is not going to work out with this chief AI officer. I better get my ass over there. Even though the CEO doesn't want me to be involved, I'm going to go in and put my face in it. Because you know what's going to happen? When the shit hits the fan, who are they going to? Not the chief AI officer. They're going to the CIO and the CISO. And in some cases, the CISO gets fined 2x his or her salary. If you're following any sort of GDPR or any of this sort of regulation policy control in Europe, and in the US it could be worse. You can go to jail, right? So like good CIOs better like, no, I'm going over there. I'm going to figure out what those cats are doing, and I'm going to get my face right in the middle of it. And so why Deming? Why Deming matters? Well, there was a time in DevOps where people would actually yell at you if you didn't have a Deming quote in your DevOps presentation. Now that doesn't happen anymore, but you probably heard all of these. But the one that, like, I could bore you with those, and I go into a lot of things about what he talks about data and what he talks about systems thinking. But the last one, it says it all. I mean, the guy was a mathematical physicist who turned into one of the most influential management consultants in the history of humankind. And that's his greatest quote, which is, people are entitled to joy in work. And so Deming was about systems thinking. Like I told you, he's, like he in 1940 sat in a seminar with the original systems dynamics thinker, worked with Russell Ackoff. Senge was one of his students. I mean, so like, if you know who those people are, he was doing it before them. And so if you want to know the quick tutorial on Deming, there's three things. I'm going to focus on one that nobody talks about, because I can tell you, like, hey, just if you think I'm full of crap, just go Google Deming's 14 points, and it'll pretty much give you a blueprint for everything we talk about at DevOps Days and DevOps Conversations, right? And then the system profound knowledge, sorry, you got to read my book. No, I'll tell you a little bit about it. But the one that, like, I think that doesn't get enough press, and it actually didn't get enough press in my book because I didn't really figure it out until I was almost done with the book, is operational definitions. And Deming would say there's no true value of any characteristic, state, or condition that is defined in terms of measurement or observation. Bang! I just knocked out the whole observability space. Because context matters. Like just using metrics, it's 42. No, it's never 42, folks. It's 41.999999. Physics demands there's no such thing as 42. Right? And like, so context matters. So Deming had a student that said, and I won't do this to you, but like count the number. So this is just an animal crackers out of the box. They beautifully break before you have to even open it. And so count the number of horses, elephants, and pigs. And really quickly, you should probably figure out, well, John, that's going to be hard. Do I combine those two together, or like the context of the question matters. And this is an even better one. All right, how many people are in this restaurant? I'm not going to waste our time. You don't have to count. But I am going to ask, a question here. Do we count the woman on the right there? I mean, I don't know, is this on a mall and she's just walking by? How about the one behind her? So maybe she does, oops, went the wrong way, got to go back, don't want to go to a restaurant. Do I count looks like probably a waiter standing up? It's an open air kitchen. Do I count the people back there? What's wrong with this? Anybody? Anybody?
No context.
Close? Actually, yes. Adam's already got a book, so I can't give him a book. But why are we counting? What was the point of why we were counting in the first place? Is it because it's weight distribution and that's a restaurant on a cruise ship? Is it because it's a fire code? Is it supply chain for food? Because the numbers will matter. It's everybody if it's weight distribution. If it's ordering food, it's the people sitting down. And so I have a little fun with some of the Doris stuff, right? Like, I think it was great when it came out. But context matters. Words matter. Lead time. Sorry, folks. That's a messy metrics without context. Root cause analysis, like if you've been studying anything about complexity and John Allspaw and Dr. Woods and those, no further comment. Zero defects. There is no world that exists in this dimension that has zero defects. Now, here's my favorite all time. Hermetically sealed deployments. How does that work? How do you deploy hermetically sealed deployments? That's part of the SLA, right? Like it's actually a metric. That's part of the SLA, the SLA metrics. Our service level agreements, all right. Words matter in AI. People are struggling now about, is that a foundational model? Or is that a large language model? Is that a large language model? Okay. But we get into by the way, last Monday, I've been doing this 40 years. Last Monday was the most insane day I've ever seen in my whole career of people just going nuts. I don't waste your time on all the DeepSeek nonsense, but markets were crashing, a paper that was not verified, security experts were telling people to go to deepseek.chat.com. Oh yeah, no, just try it out. No, that thing is hosted in Hangzhou, China. Look at the license agreement. So I told you I wasn't going to talk about profound knowledge, but the reason why it's called profound knowledge is Deming saw everything as a complex system, which is, I think we all should, right? And he said that in order to understand a complex system, you had to take 4 elements, he made it simple, in order to create a lens. And so the metaphor is like a camera. How do you get a perfect picture? You get the aperture, you get the light, you get all these different things. Well, he said that you need these 4 fundamental things to understand complex system. First, you have to understand the epistemology. You have to understand theory of knowledge. How do we think? Variation. There's a whole, everything is sort of industrial engineering, statistical process control, but it's more than that. It's analytical statistics. Psychology. So you can get all the things right, but if you don't understand people's bias, intrinsic motivation, extrinsic motivation, you're not going to solve any problems. You can get all the math right. And there's a famous presentation about all this math in a hospital about hand washing, biology, chemistry, all this stuff. But if you don't think that washing hands kills germs, we're lost. And then last but certainly not least is system thinking. It's got to be the cornerstone of everything we do. And so why now? Mark Andreessen in 2011 said software is eating the world, right? Pretty cool observation in 2011, right? He was right, all right? Josh Corman, a good friend of mine, we did a presentation in 2015 together. He said software is infecting the world, right? So he was a CISO at Sonatype. He's a pretty brilliant white hat hacker. And he wasn't anti-software, he wasn't anti-open source, but he was pointing out what the dependency nightmare was going to look like in 2018 with libraries. And we did some work together. We almost created a book. He worked at CISA in the Homeland Security during the pandemic. helped create the cold storage for the vaccine for Pfizer. Like, pretty cool person. And he was going to write a book talking about how screwed up CISA is, and he chickened out. And rightfully so, right? Like, he was going to be calling out some pretty seriously powerful people. And, but we had this idea that software is not just screwing with software, it's screwing with Maslow. I mean, when you have, like, people that are poisoning water supplies, and, you know, and like, if you sort of watch the go ahead and subscribe to a cyber critical infrastructure newsletter, and you won't want to get out of bed. I'm like, okay, AI is whatever you want to call it. I said the word fuck already, so AI is fucking with everything. So, back to my dear CIO, what does this have to do with Deming? I think Deming would be asking a lot of interesting questions right now. And so, it's late in the day. I know, you know, I'm like, should I do this? But I think it'll be fun, could be terrible. Every time I say dear CIO, do you mind just saying, and say it loud, what, John? You up for it? Yeah. All right, we got one. All right. Got to say it loud, Adam. Dear CIO.
What, John?
Prepare for the technical debt tsunami that is coming down the pike. Dear CIO.
What, John?
Don't be another Air Canada. You heard of the Air Canada thing, right? So some guy, they put up a chatbot. Oh, how lovely of them to put the first chatbot. Now, the truth is, it probably wasn't like GPT. It was probably some just nonsense code. But they scrubbed all their websites. They sort of created a chat GPT. They thought it'd be clever to say, instead of save money on calls, they took all the data. Nobody sort of validated it. And so this poor guy, quick. I'm not taking too many questions till the end, but go ahead.
I was just going to be annoying and say that the Canadian flag is drawn wrong.
The what? Oh.
Well,
I had foresight that we were going to have all this tariff stuff, and so I purposely put it back in 6 months ago, and you know, so I knew that would prompt a question where we could actually make fun of Donald Trump. But okay, thank you. So basically, some guy, his mom died, didn't have any money, so he goes into the chatbot, and it tells him he can get a refund. So he buys his ticket, comes back from the funeral, and he goes to get his refund, and they're like, that was the chatbot. And so this thing went all the way lawsuit. But here's the thing. When the lawsuit came out, the poor guy, they lost about $500 million market cap. Now they recapped that. But you know what the settlement was? Like $600. Like, don't let that happen. Don't let some GPT and RAG scan all your documents and just throw it out there as a tool so customers can ask questions. But then when they try to just ask for the $600, give it to them. You know, dear CIO.
What, John?
All right, good. This should scare this was the, so when I started talking about this technical debt tsunami, the shadow AI, I just predicted that in a large corporation, you might have like a large bank, might have 100,000 employees. Probably on the worst day with cloud, I mean, and I'm being over optimistic, maybe 3,000 people interfaced with cloud, right? I mean, you got it. You said in early days, you had to write code, there were APIs. If you were going to build some sort of shadow IT infrastructure, it wasn't it was literally probably, the 90% or 85% or, 95% tile that wasn't going to write, API calls. And actually, early days of Amazon, it was only Java API, right? That changed, obviously, over the years, But then I predicted that, like in a 100,000 person corporation bank, in AI, it's going to probably be like 70% that are actually going to interact directly with some form of AI, right? Chatbots, whatever, ChatGPT. And then LinkedIn last year did a survey and basically confirmed my numbers. Again, where's Michael Cote? In the survey world, if you saw Michael's presentation with like all surveys, 78%, 75% knowledge workers around world of generative AI. 78% is BYOA. I mean, come on, man. That doesn't scare you as a CIO? Dear CIO! Brilliant. Hey, that side of the room is winning, by the way. This one should scare the hell out of you who hadn't heard about this. So Wiz Research did some really interesting stuff. And some of the things they found, which was they were able to create embedding models that had sort of not viruses, but code in it that could escape out. So, and they put it up on Hugging Face, and this is all like white hat research, and they sort of controlled it. And what they found was if you used that open model, embedding model, and ran it, it escaped out to the OS. And turns out Hugging Face was running all that stuff on Amazon. My guess is, now this is counterfactual, is that they weren't really up on the DevOps stuff, so they didn't harden their Kubernetes. And what was found was very simply by anybody running this model, they could get access to Amazon host with multiple customers on it, just from running an inference. Right? It's out there, the research. They found some even scarier ones. They went to replicate. They went to a whole, they just started hitting all of them. Like, you know what, I bet you they're all like this. Dear CIO?
What, John?
Google gave us the lesson. When I was writing that paper, what was interesting was that we were writing that Dear CIO paper. We wanted to talk about, like, what could happen. If you read the Phoenix Project, I did another book called Investments Unlimited, which was DevOps, we call it DevOps Automated Reference Guide. It was another Phoenix Project style where we talked about a bank and how they had to create, basically immutable, digitally signed immutable attestations. Bang, bang, bang. Long story. Google it. It's a fascinating story of how to secure your pipelines, how to deal with auditors. But we put it in a Phoenix style project. So we decided to do this for the AI story as well. And so what we tried to do is make it very human, and like the Bob is the CIO, Sue's the CISO, and we do a lot of sort of character stuff. And I found this paper written in 2015, where Google literally gave us the blueprint of what we were going to look like in 2025 in the enterprise. It's incredible. It's the problems they were having with ML at scale in 2015. And almost all of it is relevant to a large enterprise today. Dear CIO.
What, John?
Remember the you run it, you own it? Here's the thing, right? If you look at most of these modern enterprise AI stacks, and I just picked Bedrock because they had the best picture, and I was too lazy to build my own sort of picture, right? But I'm not picking on Amazon Bedrock, although I could if you want me to. This is my sort of napkin-based math, but every chatbot or copilot that you see that is custom built in a large enterprise, my argument, it's anywhere from 80 to 90% just plain old infrastructure. It's cute. Here's the thing, folks. Sorry to disillusion anybody. AI is compute, network, and storage. All right? Like, it really is. And then above that, it's a lot of libraries. Above that, it's probably Kubernetes. Above that, it's a lot of cloud-native implementations. And then on that last icing layer is a bunch of, like, AI stuff. So that means you should be, again, back to the CIOs, like, go. I'm not going to go near the chief IO team. Because they're probably and this is total counterfactual on Hugging Face, but maybe they don't know anything about what people in this room or this conference know about, is that you don't just install Kubernetes and not harden it. Right? Because, like, they think it's just AI. Are you having fun? I don't know, I am. So what does this all mean, right? Like, I mean, when I wrote this first slide, I probably need to update it. So this is about a year ago. I mean, Oval, Stick, CV, they didn't know the ML stuff. So the places that like NIST, I think is still kind of terrible at trying to explain. I think they still think that, that AI is Google. And so, but the people that we've relied on to help us with everything pre-AI were basically behind the curve. And I will say, like, MITRE, MITRE has gotten really good. OWASP has gotten phenomenal. I'll point out some of the stuff there. But, like, they're catching up. So the people that we expect to give us the information that we need to rely on, I mean, the CVs are pretty good right now for, like, Python libraries. They're finding out, like, not PyTorch, but different sort of PyNum or those type of things. They're finding vulnerabilities. In fact, the DeepSeek one, they just found part of DeepSeek that just came out today. They found a vulnerability in some of the PyNum stuff that was in the DeepSeek implementation, right? So, and there's these new malware opportunities. Like the adversaries have been able to use this technology on steroids. I told you about what the Wiz folk found, but like, I don't know if you know about RAG, what some adversaries are doing right now is, and I've seen this, I've seen large companies say, here's how we build this. We use this source of the public sources of data to build our RAG to give you this amazing tool. Well, the adversary is like, I think they're going to get that document, so I'm going to put 0-byte code, jailbreak code in that document. So when you put it in a RAG and somebody inferences on that data, it jailbreaks onto the system. And like the adversary is like, man, they've gotten so dumb, I don't even have to break into their own site. They're telling me the PDF that's out there that I can put 0-byte jailbreak code in, and I know, just like Wiz found out with their embedding model, that if I run an inference against that, I can actually get access to the host that I'm running on. Does that not scare the shit out of anybody? So when you hear your manager and stuff just rag the shit out, and I like RAG. I forgot to mention, my only paying client these days is MongoDB, and I support their RAG. So I'm all in on RAG. But when people just say, oh, just rag it, it's a lot more than just ragging it, right? The phishing schemes, I mean, these jailbreaks, just Google, go out, and you know the best way to find out if you're sort of worried about your infrastructure and your chief AI officer building all this stuff, start following bug bounties for AI. Because I'll tell you right there, what they're paying for is what you need to worry about, right? Especially if you're creating your own models. Like, and by the way, these vectors, you can't encrypt them because they're highly dimensional data spaces, and when you encrypt them, you lose that highly dimensional nearest neighbor stuff. Now, what you can do is like matrix multiplication or homomorphic. There are techniques, but somebody, and this is another thing, the boundaries. If you have built your own embedding, or, this is why I always run out of time, but it's fun. If they know what embedding scheme you're using, they already know how to break that embedding down because it's all open source. And by the way, an embedding is a highly embedded vector. I can just run through that with my own inference engine, and I can tell almost everything I know about your secret data that's in your model just because I figured out your embedding model that you use. So don't even use it. Be careful about using a public Hugging Face embedding model to create your vector database or to create your, I don't know, reverse engineering talked about, deep fakes. So right now I think OWASP is doing an incredible job. Their recent paper, the LLM, so they got an LLM top 10. And then they created a revised one, so that shows you how fast. They had the LLM top, the original OWASP top 10 was around for like 10 years with very few changes. In the last year, they've changed it significantly twice, right, for LLMs. So the paper is phenomenal. I mean, you can learn a lot about what I'm worried about, what a CIO should be worried about. What Deming would be screaming at the top of his lungs right now is start reading this and understand what a prompt injection is. But not just a prompt injection. Those are easily things to fix. The things that are hard to fix are these real geniuses that are putting 0-byte code with execution behind it that will actually take action when somebody does how many cities are there in Nebraska? All right, and so there's and poison. And one of the worst things right now is you can have all your IP on a model, and somebody can copy that to something that's big enough to hold it, and they're walking out the door with all your IP. It's as simple as that, right? Model theft. Again, this I think is the more latest one, but I would definitely. This will help you understand too. So if you might be in the business of the person that has to say, hey, I think we need to go look at what they're doing over there. OWASP Top 10 LM is a great place to ask questions. Because it's a very detailed paper. You'll learn so much about how, they've done an incredible job. And then in the last paper, they point to MITRE ATT&CK framework. So, and if none of this makes sense, tough, I don't care. So what do? All right, dear CAO.
What, John?
There we go, you're still awake. I think here's one of the things I've learned, in the cloud days, and Cigna has made this all public, right? I talked to one of the guys who ran the original cloud at Cigna, the whole infrastructure, and then he's been in charge of the Gen AI project at Cigna. And he said, John, one of the big mistakes we made is we didn't really put out any specific definitions of what to do with cloud. Because they were all afraid, they didn't know what it was, And so what that gave everybody the license to do is to do now, ask forgiveness later. Because they never said what you wouldn't do, what you could really get in trouble for, and what you couldn't do. And so he told me is that this time they put in training, and they don't really know enough to be clear and positive exactly what you can't do and can do, but at least they're clear on this you can do, this you better ask, and that you better never do. And it may change over time, but if you don't give your organization some type of training, and that was sort of the disaster, and I'm sort of generalizing, but it was mostly true, and the reason we had this shadow IT problem with cloud is nobody could decide what to tell people what they could or couldn't do. And some of the lessons learned from large insurance companies and banks is this time we're going to tell them, we may not be clear, we may change it. How about bringing the SRE people into Gen AI now, not waiting for the disaster to come? Let's add expertise. Let's move into SRE. Let's have an SRE for Gen AI. Because again, if you accept my premise that 90% of it is just infrastructure, then they're going to be solving at least that 90% of the problem. And if they happen to know more about jailbreaks and OWASP and how inference works and what vectors look like and highly dimensional spaces work, bonus points. Automated governance, like we got to figure this out fast. I'm too lazy, I'm too busy, I'm a kid, I get 65 years. But I tell you, I'm screaming at SI guys because I think that's the place I want to put it. I want to put, automated governance. If you read I don't have any copies of it, but Investments Unlimited, it's about a large bank that literally built digitally signed immutable evidence so auditors could not question what you did when you push software. And then, the other thing, like we got to slow down a little bit. We are sort of eating the earth. If you saw, I know none of you saw my presentation yesterday on AI and the AI plumbers, but literally right now, in general, enterprises using 15% of their GPU farms. Right, their GPU. Their GPUs, basically on average, there's statistics now, there's reports that in general, large enterprises are spending $50, $100 million on NVIDIA chips. And because of memory, bandwidth, backlog of InfiniBand, they literally are on average only wasting 85%. Those things are about 15% active. And those are costing us in lots of different ways. So here's the last, think about that, think about GPU optimization, go listen to the AI plumbers. They got some great open source stuff that might be a hard sell to your CEO of a billion-dollar corporation when NVIDIA lives in their building. But here's the point. Just because you can AI something doesn't mean you should. It's not like everything has to be Gen AI. Again, I try not to plug my vendors when I'm talking too much, but the MongoDB document object and full text search works pretty good for a lot of stuff. Doesn't have to be ragged and thrown into a vector. All right, so how, this is some of my, if you haven't followed Jay Bloom, he's a genius person. I love, every time I see his presentation, I go back and change my slides. But some of it is him, but well-defined language. We're going to have to get really good at what knowledge is. If you start following any of the stuff I'm talking about AI, I'm really thinking about epistemology, what's the philosophy of AI, boring stuff. But we're going to get better at asking each other questions. Because we can't do that. It was hard enough having overloaded terminology in things like IT, DevOps, and cloud native. It's going to get a lot worse when we got agents in the middle of our conversations. Operational definitions, context. Don't just ask how many animal crackers are there or how many horses. Guardrails and audit, right? We need to look, thank you. We need to, a lot of the models have guardrails, some better than other. A lot of them do it differently. There's a lot of them you can actually modify and you have sort of your own ability to Vertex from Google is pretty powerful. There are some observability tools. Observability in AI is different from the way we mostly know it. It's based on something called evaluations, or what they call LLM as a judge, where LLMs actually go ahead and try to figure out, so you give it a baseline of stuff and say, these are the things that should never happen in my chat, or my chatbot, or my copilot. And it'll evaluate and try to see if it can make those things happen, right? So guardrails are a big piece. There are some of the vendors right now, some of the people who created Kubernetes. I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about it yet, but they're putting like these sort of, think about like SAST and DAST for prompts. You know, imagine every prompt that somebody in your organization puts. It's not SAST and DAST like it's looking for dependencies, but it's looking for things like jailbreaks, well-known things that are causing inference to do things that it shouldn't do. Synthetic questions is beautiful. I do a lot of work with like synthetic data generation. I do it for like research. I do it for my new book to validate my book. But you can use synthetic data. There's something called RAG-ASK. Synthetic data allows you to just like things that you would sort of test with 10 humans, you can sort of emulate as if it's 4,000 humans, right? Generating data. And dimensionality reduction, let me show you this. This is really cool. So I know I'm getting close to end, but so I ran a whole lot of hackathons for MongoDB. So like these hackathons are really fun, like AI hackathons and all. And this one team came up to me and they so there are these tools that do what they call dimensionality reduction. And so the idea is when you put your data like in an OpenAI GPT-4, it's actually it's at what they call 1,536 dimensions by default. So if you think about a two-dimensional plane, x equals 5, y equals 7, then think about a three-dimensional plane. So where does that sort of thing mean? Well, in a high-dimensional space, these words and sentences and paragraphs are actually 1,536 floating point numbers to say where it is. And then it's just basically nearest neighbor. I mean, I'm totally oversimplifying how this stuff works, but that's how it's actually getting your answers. The beauty is some real genius people are able to take that 1,536 and mathematically show it in a two-dimensional space. And so, the way I found out about this is unbelievable. So I used my book, my Deming book, and I threw it into, obviously I ragged it, I put it in a high-dimensional space, and then I used this tool called Nomic, which is a graphical tool to reduce it puts it in a two-dimensional space. All of a sudden, I'm seeing all these clusters, and one of the clusters was Toyota. And there's a lot of stuff in my book about Toyota. In the middle of Toyota is a little bubble saying healthcare. I'm like, nah, there's no healthcare in my book. And I went and I looked, I found the chunk that was related to it, and the interpretation of the LLM as a judge that they used took some words, remember words going to matter, and it misinterpreted it as healthcare. So that same hackathon, this group took all the commands that their organization were running, they preceded it, and then as they were actively running commands, they put it in a RAG, and then they used it in Nomad to show, there's open source projects out there, that you could show it in a reduced dimensionality. And what you started seeing is all these commands that everybody was running, and what was beauty about it is like, as we're sort of looking at it, they're like, you know what? Nobody should be running that command. It started showing you the cluster aggregation of what people were doing from the command line. And again, so like if you recognize what the beauty of that is taking data in a space that no human can comprehend, using this incredible mathematics to reduce it to a space where you could comprehend, and it's not going to answer every question, but it will find a lot of sort of little hidden gems. So it's a really cool thing. I'll go through that. I mean, I think, this is my inner Jay Bloom coming out, back to sort of why we need SRE for AI. If a system is to be stable, the number of states of control mechanisms, it's what Ashby's law, basically. And like, as this thing is exploding in whatever our organization or enterprise is, we need to create the hourglass. And I believe that the hourglass is the CIO, CISO, it's sort of our DevOps expertise, and it's sort of SRE as let's get that involved right now. And that's it, folks. We're done.